Hey fellow board gamers, do you like roll and writes? I know I do. Maybe obsessed is the better word for me. But anyway, what if I told you that there is now a hybrid roll and flip and write out there? Still doesn't tickle your fancy? Well, what if I told you again that this is a massive game where each player gets not one, not two, but 4 individual boards? Interested and maybe a bit intimidated? Well, don't be, because Twilight Inscription is surprisingly not that complex. I'll give you the general overview of the game and we'll do a mini comparison at the end with Hadrian's Wall. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Twilight Inscription, which I'll refer to as just TI from this point on, is a 1 to 8 player roll and write game where you try to get the most points over 23 or 24 rounds of the game. And as promised, each player will be given 4 sheets labeled Navigation, Expansion, Warfare, and Industry. You'll then also get a character card with its own unique set of passive and active ability. Each round of the game always begins with a card flip from this pre-constructed event deck. There are 4 different types of these event cards, which will determine how you play a particular round. We'll first go through a strategy round as it is the most common round type in game. In fact, they are pretty much your quote-unquote normal round as the other 3 are basically mini filler rounds. A strategy or normal round is always made up of 1 flip and write phase and 1 roll and write phase. Since the flipping part is already done, all you need to do is to spend these displayed resources on one of your sheets. For example, these 2 resources on the card could be spent on your navigation sheet, making it the active sheet for this round. So no, you cannot ever split them up over multiple sheets like so. Once all the players have simultaneously done this flip and write phase, then the roll and write part begins. The 6 dice, 3 black and 3 colored, will then be rolled together. Though we'll have to ignore the colored dice for now as we have not unlocked them yet. The other resources rolled on the black dice, however, can then be spent on your sheet again, just like the flip and write phase. The catch here though is that you can only spend them on the same active sheet that you previously chose for this round. Once everyone has done that, well, that's one round of the game. To begin the next round, you simply just flip the next event card from the deck, and if it is another strategy / normal round, then you'll just have to repeat the 2 phases again. Now let's go through the 4 sheets to see what they do, starting from navigation. By the way, you'll be hearing me say the word sheet a lot, and I'm sure there will be times where I'll make it sound like shit instead because of my Indonesian accent. So when in doubt, it's this one. Anyway, navigation is all about building pathways and claiming the systems within your pathway's reach. You can use these 2 resources to extend your reach, while this one allows you to claim a system within your reach. These systems or resources come in either small or larger circles. More importantly, they will either have a dotted outline or a dashed outline. When you claim one of these dashed outline ones, nothing really happens and the resource stays there. You just gotta remember that you own that resource for now. The dotted resources, on the other hand, always requires a follow-up. For example, if you circle one of these commodities, you will then need to quote-unquote store that commodity by going into your industry sheet. The industry chart right here is where you keep track of your commodities. As we just circled or claimed the blue one, we can then cross out the first blue commodity on this chart. Fully crossing out the sections of each commodity will give you its respective victory points. Also, if you fully cross out the commodities on these columns, you will also increase your goods production. We'll talk about this goods production later in the video. There are also a few unique things that you can only get from navigation. For example, this relic lets you draw a powerful one-time use card, which also gives you some points, while the Mechatol Rex gives you rewards based on how early you claim it compared to other players. Aside from making routes and claiming systems, you can also spend resources to unlock these technologies right here. They always either cost you a premium resource or 3 of these triangle resource. Each one of the 4 sheets has their own 2 unique technologies, and they always help you develop that particular sheet. For example, this particular one from navigation lets you use the wormholes on that sheet. The wormhole lets you jump around the board, as when you stroke a path into one like so, you can continue the path out of any one of the other wormholes like so. This is also one of the ways in which you can reach this isolated island right here. Alright, now that you know most of navigation, here's how a normal round plays. The round card has just been flipped, and you have to choose a sheet to spend these resources on. In this example, you chose navigation. As the 3 resources only lets you build paths, you then decide to spend those resources like so. Once everyone is done spending the card's resources, then these 6 dice are rolled, giving you in this case this result. Ignoring the colored dice for now, you are then left with these resources. Instead of building more paths with the triangles, you decide to invest on unlocking this technology instead, as your pathing is very close to this wormhole already. As the last remaining resource lets you claim a system, you then decide to claim this planet resource right here. And that's the end of the round. Just remember from this example that we have claimed this planet resource because it's going to be relevant as we go through the next sheet called expansion. The expansion sheet is basically just a game of bingo. No, seriously, you use the resources that you get to cross out the same ones on the sheet. Fully crossing out a row or column like so will then give you that row or column's reward. The sheet always gives you 6 separate bingo sections, but they are not available at the start of the game. You need to unlock them first by spending the required planet resource. And yes, this is where we can spend our resource. Look, I know I said that you can only have one active sheet at a time, but you can actually still use the resources that you have claimed on the other sheets. In fact, this is the only way for us to unlock those bingo sheets, as the expansion sheet itself does not have a planet resource for you to claim. So in this case, we have to use the planet resource that we claimed on navigation by crossing it out in order to unlock one of these bingo sections that we want, like so. This is also the general theme, by the way, where all 4 sheets in the game will feed off each other. Aside from the bingos, there is a mini section right here where you can pay resources to gain one of these focus die resource. Remember those colored dice? Yep, this is how you unlock them. See, each one of the 4 sheets has this mini upgrade section. The game starts off with these things being empty and kinda sad, but you can quote-unquote turn on the upgrades by consuming these focus die resources like so. For each upgrade that you activated, you will then be able to use the corresponding colored dice whenever that particular sheet becomes active. As they are sheet specific, you will need more focus dice to upgrade the other sheets. Each colored die will guarantee you a particular resource, as they all correspond to one resource type only. Also, they sometimes can give you double resources as well. In comparison, the black default dice that you start the game with are pretty different. Now that expansion is done, let us move on to the warfare sheet. If expansion is bingo, then warfare will be the closest one to Tetris. You again use the same resources, but now to deploy these polyamino warships. As per usual polyamino rule, you can mirror and rotate them around, but they have to be built next to the starting line or next to one of your other warships. Each dot of these warships will represent one power, but what or who are you fighting exactly? Well, that will be your neighbors, kinda like 7 Wonders. Basically, when the war round comes up instead of the normal strategy round, you will be comparing your warfare sheets to both of your neighbors. The warfare sheet has 2 rows and 4 columns. Your left column battles your left neighbor, while the right one fights with your right neighbor. The 4 rows, on the other hand, represent the 4 wars that will occur in the game. The quote-unquote war in this game is really just comparing the sheets' total powers. For example, during the second war, you only look at the second row against your neighbors. If you have more total power than your neighbor, you win the war and get that side's victory bonus. But if you had less power than your neighbor instead, then you lose and get the minus point penalty. Do this for both neighbors each war, and that's basically it for warfare. So let's now move on to our final sheet, the industry. The industry sheet has this peculiar looking grid full of resources. You start from the middle where the X mark is, and you would want to basically claim as much resources as you can. Alternatively, you can also just scrap them instead. But wait a second, why would you ever want to scrap them instead of claiming them? Well, that's because claiming stuff is more restrictive. Doing an X and an O requires different resources. But that's not really what I'm referring to. Here's the rule. You can X next to any existing O's or X's, but you can only O next to an existing X. See, if you keep O'ing at the start, you eventually will have no more place that you can O, as there is no more open X's. So you have to do another X before you can O again. You could also use multiple X's to quickly reach the juicier resources located at the corners of the grid. Or even better, if you have the correct premium resources, you can use them to jump ahead and X on the edge of the main grid, or even on these floating mini grids. And that's basically the industry sheet. But before we put a checkmark on it, let's discuss the remaining round types. We already covered strategy and war, so we are only left with production and council. When a production round appears, you look at your industry chart's production capacity right here. For each production capacity that you currently have, again from filling the columns of resources above them, you will get one trade good resource which are stored right here. The trade good is a wild resource which can be used as any one of the 3 basic resources on your active sheets. And that's literally it for production. As for the council round, it starts similarly like a production round, but rather than observing the goods production section, you'll be looking at your councilor track instead. You gain votes equal to the number of councilors that you have, and right after, one of these agenda cards will be read out. There are always 2 potential scenarios or outcomes on these cards. Everyone then has to secretly vote on the outcome they prefer. Based on the vote tally, the winning outcome will then be applied to everyone's sheets. Here's some of the agenda cards in case you wanna know what the scenarios are like. There is one last thing I would like to mention, which are these objective cards. Yes, I know, it's a lot to take in already. I promise that this last one is going to be short. During setup, 4 objective cards will be laid out, where each one of them will correspond to one particular sheet. They are basically open missions that give you extra points when you fulfill the requirement. The player that completes the objective first will get the bigger amount of points. Anyone else that completes the same one after will only get the reduced amount instead. And yeah, the game ends when the 4th war round is resolved, and the player with the most total points from all 4 sheets is the winner of the game. So, how good is Twilight Inscription? First off, I gotta say that I actually quite like this game. The game promises an epic roll and write experience, and they definitely delivered. There's a lot of things that they do right. For example, I like the different special puzzles of each sheet, as they're very straightforward but still not that easily solvable. Sure, these puzzles are nothing groundbreaking, but that definitely hasn't compromised the overall game experience. I also like the sandbox sandbox feel of the game, as it gives you many ways to tackle each sheet or just the whole game in general. And I also like that this is probably the roll and write game with the most player interaction to date. There are also some other minor stuff which I enjoy, like the engine building aspect of it, which allows for some customization, or the decent amount of replayability that you can get from 9 set of sheets and 24 very different character cards. I would usually also complain about the 2-hour play duration at this point, but the minimum downtime from the simultaneous turns really keeps me from being disengaged. And even the game itself looks great! I mean, this is probably the sexiest roll and write I've ever seen. Honestly, what is there to not like? Is what I would have said if the game is perfect, but it isn't. Case and point, the console/voting rounds. Now, if you have seen other reviews of the game like the Dice Towers, you will know that everyone thinks the voting rounds are just weak and forgettable, and I 100% agree. I would have said they're a hit or a miss, but they just miss like all the time. You'll find players just not voting at all for the first 2 rounds because they do not care for the scenarios, and proceed to just dump all their votes on the last round because there is no endgame point benefit. This is also why I prefer characters that have special interactions with the votes, because at least you will have another use for them. And to make things worse, they also break the flow of the game. Whenever one of these rounds come up, you'll have to literally stop the game and read the scenarios out loud. If you get one of the short ones, it's actually not that bad. But if you get one of these wordy ones instead, you gotta then quote-unquote translate what they mean, because the scenarios can be pretty convoluted. So yeah, definitely my least favorite part of the game. Another thing that bothers me about the game is the many small little rules or knowledge of the game, which are not listed on the player aid, and sometimes not even on the rulebook itself, or as I like to call them, the asterisks. The biggest example by far here is this black normal dice. Tell me, fellow board gamers, what do you think is the distribution of this 6-sided die, knowing full well that there are only 3 types of resources on it? If you answer 2 by 2 by 2, then you'll be incorrect, just like when I played this game for the first time. The distribution is actually 3 2 2 2 1, but you would have to physically check the die itself to know that. This crucial piece of information is not mentioned anywhere, not even on the rulebook itself. You know, I don't expect every little thing to be in the rulebook, like freaking how to roll a dice or whatever. But surely this needs to be in one of these, right? And finally, the last thing I would like to talk about is this dry erase chalk marker. They are actually pretty good, and the orange really pops in the sea of blue and black. Unfortunately, they are such a pain to remove. If you write and immediately erase them, yeah, whatever, it's easy to do, but you don't ever erase them right away because you have to let it stay there for the remainder of the game. This eventually dries them up, and when you try to erase them, it's going to feel a bit more like scraping dry paint. Now, I know the game wants you to use dry paper towels for the endgame cleanup, but it's still a chore to clean for almost fully marked sheets. It does also recommend you to use slightly damp paper towels, but a thread has been raised on BGG saying, do not use water to clean or be very careful. Quote, I sprayed them down after a play to wipe them off, but some water got into the edges and made the boards peel on the edges. While the game surely didn't tell us to spray down the sheets with water, this does show the risk of following this recommendation. All in all, Twilight Inscription is a very puzzly and enjoyable game that remains as a very solid package despite the few rough edges that it has. If you like heavier roll and writes, or even just stinky Euro games in general, then I would definitely recommend this game. And speaking of heavier roll and writes, it's now time to compare TI to Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall is a flip and write game that provides you with only 2 sheets instead of 4. Each round of the game starts off similarly by flipping a random central card, which determines what resources everyone will get for the round. In addition, each player must also randomly draw 2 cards from their own player deck. Out of the 2, one gives you even more resources for that round, while the other one is used for your endgame goal. Most of the time, you use these resources to advance on the game's various tracks. For example, this particular track requires a purple worker to progress it. So if you have 2 of them this round, you can spend both workers to cross off the first 2 boxes of the track and instantly gain the resources from the second box. Since you can immediately use it to advance on another track, you'll be chaining your turns a lot in this game. The left side sheet of the game is mostly centered around these 3 cohorts at the top. Basically, whenever you cross out this shield icon from anywhere below, you get to also cross out one of the 3 cohort tracks up top, which signifies the amount of strength that it has. This is pretty important, as everyone's cohorts will be attacked at the end of every round. More on this a bit later. The right side sheet, on the other hand, has 5 more intricate tracks that allows you to do different things, and some of them even has their own mini games. You're basically trying to, using the 2 sheets, gain as much of these point symbols as you can, as they become your total score at the end of the game. They even have tracks for each one of them, which comes with their own bonuses. Now, I'm going to immediately jump scare you with this early revelation. I don't like Hadrian's Wall, and this is mostly due to how they handle randomness in game. Case in point, these cohorts and the attack mechanic. As mentioned earlier, the game attacks your cohorts every round, but each cross on on your cohort allows you to always block one attack. The issue here is that you have 3 cohorts, and which one gets attacked by how many times is purely determined by the central card draw. For example, in round 3 of the normal difficulty, 4 cards are revealed for the attack. The top section of the cards will tell you which side it is attacking. So, in this case, the left, middle, and right cohorts will be attacked twice, once, and 1 time respectively. In this example, the middle and right cohort is fine because we are able to block all the attacks, but the left one was only able to block 1, causing you to suffer 1 unblocked attack. This in turn gives you a point of disdain, which also subtracts your reward from the successful blocks and becomes endgame negative points. Basically, all you can do is guess which cohort to upgrade to prevent yourself from getting penalties. Now, the randomness isn't really the trouble here. Luck is expected, especially since we are talking about a flip/roll and write. See, in TI, a very similar type of randomness exists where you have to choose an active sheet before rolling the resource dice. But what makes TI's randomness work is the available and impactful ways of mitigation. The only form of quote-unquote mitigation in Hadrian's Wall still requires you to choose which cohort you want it for. So yes, there is luck even in the mitigation itself. Also, you can only at max negate 2 damage from each cohort, which isn't going to be as impactful when you have to reveal up to 12 cards in higher difficulties. The same kind of swingy luck also exists in this gladiator minigame, but at least you can actually just ignore it, unlike the cohorts. Aside from the luck itself, solving spatial puzzles for me is just much more interesting and fun than going up tracks. If you do actually like the idea of going up tracks and comboing your actions, then I would highly recommend Fleet the Dice game instead. It's a very solid roll and write game with similar track/comboing mechanic that is slightly less complex than Hadrian's Wall. All in all, if TI is a work of art, which I believe is to some extent, then Hadrian's Wall is sadly just work. This is also coming from someone that usually prefers shorter games, which would be Hadrian's Wall in this case. But I just cannot recommend Hadrian's Wall even without TI being in the picture. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. Check out my channel for more videos like this, though they are usually a bit shorter, and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And that's it. See ya!